The old concert hall smelled like polished wood and decades of music. Thomas wiped down the velvet seats one by one, his worn cloth moving in steady circles. It was past midnight, and everyone had gone home hours ago. The audience, the musicians, the important people in fancy clothes, they were all sleeping now. But Thomas was still here, like he always was, cleaning up after their dreams. He'd been doing this job for 15 years. 15 long years of mopping marble floors, emptying trash bins full of crumpled programs, and wiping fingerprints off glass doors. People walked past him every day like he was invisible. To them, he was just part of the building, like the walls or the curtains. Nobody asked his name. Nobody wondered about his story, but Thomas had a story. A big one. When he finished cleaning the main hall, he locked the doors and walked toward the storage room. His footsteps echoed in the empty space. He loved this time of night when the hall belonged only to him. No rushing crowds, no chattering voices, just silence and possibility. From his locker, he pulled out an old violin case. The leather was cracked and faded, held together with tape in some places. He'd bought this case 20 years ago when he was a different person, living a different life. Back then, he was a music student with big dreams and bigger talent. His teacher said he had something special, that rare gift that couldn't be taught. But life had other plans. His father got sick, really sick. The medical bills piled up like mountains. His mother worked 2 jobs, but it wasn't enough. Thomas had to make a choice, continue his studies or help his family survive. It wasn't really a choice at all. He dropped out of the conservatory 3 months before graduation and took the first job he could find. That was at this very concert hall, pushing a mop instead of a bow. He never told anyone at work about his past. What was the point? They wouldn't believe him anyway. A janitor who could play violin? It sounded like a bad joke. Thomas carried his violin to the main stage. The spotlight was off, but the emergency lights gave the space a soft glow. He sat in the first chair of the violin section, right where the principal violinist sat during performances. He'd watched that spot for 15 years, studied every person who'd occupied it, learned from their techniques and their mistakes. He opened the case carefully, like he was handling something precious. And it was precious. It was all he had left of his old dreams. The violin wasn't expensive or fancy. The varnish was worn in places where his chin had rested thousands of times. But when he lifted it to his shoulder, it felt like coming home. Thomas started with scales, warming up his fingers. They weren't as fast as they used to be. Cleaning floors all day made his hands stiff and his shoulders ache. But after a few minutes, the muscle memory kicked in. His fingers remembered what his mind sometimes forgot, that he was good at this, really good. He moved into a piece by Vivaldi, one of his favorites. The notes filled the empty hall, bouncing off the high ceiling and wrapping around the empty seats. This was his secret life, his real life. These quiet hours when he could be who he really was, not just the invisible man in the janitor's uniform. Sometimes he imagined the seats were full. He imagined people listening, really listening, the way audiences did during concerts. He imagined the respect in their eyes, the applause, the feeling of being seen. But when he opened his eyes, the hall was always empty. Just him and the ghosts of performances past. Thomas practiced every night he worked. It was his routine, his meditation, his therapy. The world might see him as just a janitor, but here in these stolen hours, he was an artist. He kept his skills sharp, learned new pieces by listening to the orchestra rehearsals during his breaks. He'd memorized entire symphonies just by hearing them over and over while he cleaned. Nobody knew. Not his co-workers, not the musicians, certainly not the conductor. Especially not the conductor. Maestro Ashford was a famous man, celebrated around the world. He'd conducted in Paris, London, New York, and Tokyo. He had awards and honors and a reputation as big as his ego. Thomas had watched him for years, studied his techniques, noticed how he brought out the best in the orchestra. But he'd also seen the other side, the way Ashford treated people he considered beneath him. It had happened just last week. Thomas was cleaning near the stage during an afternoon rehearsal. He'd paused for a moment, his hand resting on his mop, completely absorbed in the music. He didn't realize his lips were moving, silently playing along with the violin section, his fingers twitching slightly with the fingering positions. Ashford noticed. He stopped the orchestra mid-phrase and pointed at Thomas. "You there, the cleaner. Do you have something to add? Perhaps you think you can play better than my musicians?" The orchestra members laughed. Not mean laughter exactly, but uncomfortable chuckles. Thomas felt his face go hot. He shook his head and mumbled an apology, going back to his mopping. But Ashford wasn't finished. "It's amusing, isn't it?" he said to the orchestra, his voice dripping with condescension. "Even the janitor thinks he understands music. Next, he'll be asking for a chair in the violin section." More laughter followed. Ashford waved his hand dismissively. "Back to work, please. Let's leave the music to the musicians." Thomas had left quickly, his jaw clenched tight. He'd wanted to say something to defend himself, but what could he say? He was just a janitor. Nobody would believe he'd once been good enough to attend the conservatory, that he'd won competitions, that his teachers had called him gifted. That night, alone in the empty hall, Thomas had played with fury. Every hurt feeling, every year of invisibility, every dream deferred, it all came out through his violin. The music was angry and sad and beautiful. When he finished, his hands were shaking. Now, a week later, Thomas was back in his usual spot, playing for an audience of empty seats. He'd learned to accept his situation. This was his life, and it wasn't a bad life. He had a steady job, he could help his parents, and he still had music, even if nobody heard it but him. He didn't know that everything was about to change. He didn't know that tomorrow night, the biggest performance of the season would turn into a crisis. He didn't know that Maestro Ashford would soon need exactly what he'd mocked, a janitor who understood music better than anyone realized. Thomas finished his practice session and carefully packed away his violin. He had 3 more hours of cleaning before his shift ended. The bathrooms needed attention, and someone had spilled something sticky in the lobby. Glamorous work for a man who could play Paganini. He smiled to himself as he pushed his cleaning cart down the hallway. Life was funny sometimes. You never knew what tomorrow might bring. But for now, he was content with his secret, his stolen moments of beauty in the quiet hours of the night. The concert hall settled into silence again, keeping Thomas's secret safe for one more day. The next evening started like any other. Thomas arrived at 6 in the evening, punched his time card, and changed into his work uniform. The concert hall was buzzing with unusual energy. Tonight was the gala performance, the biggest event of the entire season. Wealthy donors, music critics from major newspapers, and even some politicians would be in attendance. The pressure was enormous. Thomas began his routine, starting with the lobby. He polished the brass railings until they gleamed, vacuumed the red carpet, and made sure every glass surface was spotless. Through the main doors, he could hear the orchestra warming up. The scattered notes and scales created a chaotic symphony that somehow always sounded hopeful to him. Around 7 o'clock, something felt different. The usual pre-performance buzz had shifted into something else, something tense. Thomas noticed people rushing past him more frantically than normal. Stage managers were speaking urgently into their headsets. Someone dropped a stack of programs and didn't stop to pick them up. Thomas grabbed his dustpan and started cleaning up the scattered papers. That's when he heard 2 staff members talking in worried whispers near the box office. "I can't believe this is happening tonight of all nights," one said. "Has anyone reached David yet?" the other asked, still stuck on the highway. "There was a massive accident. He says he's at least an hour away, maybe more." Thomas's ears perked up. David was the substitute violinist, the backup player who filled in when needed. Why were they calling him? He got his answer 5 minutes later when another staff member rushed past, talking loudly into her phone. "We need someone who can play principal violin. Now. I don't care if they're retired, if they're teaching, if they're... Just find someone." Thomas felt his heart skip. Something had happened to the principal violinist. He pushed his cleaning cart toward the backstage area, moving slowly, trying to look invisible like always. Nobody stopped him. Janitors could go anywhere. That was one benefit of being overlooked. Backstage was chaos. Orchestra members stood in clusters, their instruments hanging uselessly in their hands. Some looked worried, others frustrated. At the center of it all stood Maestro Ashford, his face red, his expensive suit jacket already wrinkled from stress. "This is a disaster," Ashford shouted. "The biggest performance of the year, and we have no principal violinist." "Where is David?" "Still stuck in traffic, Maestro," the stage manager replied. "The accident is bad. Police say the highway won't clear for at least 90 minutes. 90 minutes! The performance starts in 25 minutes. The audience is already arriving." Ashford pulled at his collar like he couldn't breathe. "What about Peterson? Or Michelle Chen?" "Peterson is in Boston for a wedding. Chen is 8 months pregnant and on bed rest. I've called everyone on our substitute list. Nobody can get here in time." Thomas stood in the shadows near the stage curtains, his hands gripping his mop handle. His mind was racing. He could do this. He knew the program. He'd listened to every rehearsal while cleaning. He'd practiced these exact pieces in the empty hall at night. He knew every note, every dynamic, every tricky passage. But who would listen to a janitor? Ashford was pacing now, his hands clasped behind his back. "Can we reschedule? Cancel?" "Maestro, there are already 300 people in the lobby. The mayor is here. The Arts Council Board. Critics from the Times. If we cancel, the reputation damage would be severe. The donors might pull funding." Thomas watched Ashford's face cycle through emotions, anger, fear, desperation. This was the great conductor brought low, and Thomas felt an unexpected sympathy. He understood what it meant to have something important slip through your fingers. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me." Nobody heard him. They were all too busy panicking. "Excuse me," he said louder. The stage manager glanced at him with irritation. "Not now. We're in a crisis, I know. That's why I'm here." Thomas's voice was steady, though his heart was pounding. "I can play the principal violin part." The backstage area went silent. Everyone turned to stare at him. Someone actually laughed, a short, shocked sound. Ashford looked at Thomas like he'd grown a second head. "What did you say?" "I can play the part. I know the entire program. I can do it." Ashford's expression shifted from shock to recognition, then to something uglier. You're the cleaner who was watching rehearsal last week. The one who thought he knew music." His tone was mocking, disbelieving. "This is not the time for jokes." "I'm not joking, sir. I'm serious. I can help." "You're a janitor," Ashford said, as if this explained everything. "You push a mop. You empty trash. You don't play in a professional orchestra?" Thomas felt the old, familiar shame trying to crawl up his throat, but he pushed it down. "I was a music student at the conservatory 15 years ago. I was good. I'm still good. I practice every night in the main hall after everyone leaves. I know this program backwards and forwards. The orchestra members were watching now, some curious, others skeptical." The stage manager looked at her watch. "Maestro, we have 20 minutes. If there's any chance, any chance." Ashford threw his hands up. "This man cleans toilets. And you want him to play principal violin for the most important concert of the season? I'm just saying we don't have many options." Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I can prove it. I recorded myself practicing last week. You can hear for yourself." The stage manager grabbed the phone before Ashford could protest. She hit play. Thomas's recording filled the space, clear, confident violin playing. It was the same piece they were performing tonight, and it was good. "Really good." Ashford's eyebrows went up. The orchestra members leaned in closer. When the recording ended, there was a moment of stunned silence. "That's you playing?" the stage manager asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Where's your violin?" "In my locker. I can get it in 2 minutes." Ashford looked torn, his pride battling with his desperation. "This is insane. Even if you can play, and that's a huge if, you have no performance experience. You'll crack under pressure. You'll ruin everything." "Maybe," Thomas admitted. "But maybe I won't, and right now, I'm your only option. David isn't going to make it in time. You know that." The stage manager looked at Ashford. "Maestro?" Ashford closed his eyes for a long moment. Thomas could see the internal struggle on his face. Finally, the conductor opened his eyes and nodded sharply. "Fine, but we audition him properly first. Get your violin. You have 5 minutes to prove you can actually do this. If you waste my time, I'll have you fired." Thomas ran. He sprinted to the employee locker room, his heart racing faster than his feet. This was it. This was his chance. After 15 years of invisible nights and silent performances, Someone was finally going to hear him play. He grabbed his violin case and ran back, his breath coming in gasps. The orchestra had assembled on stage, waiting. They looked at him with curiosity and doubt. He was still wearing his janitor uniform, his name tag slightly crooked. Ashford stood at the podium, his baton in hand. "You know the Tchaikovsky?" "Yes, sir." "Every note." "Then let's hear it. From the top of the second movement. And don't waste my time." Thomas walked to the principal chair. His hands were shaking as he opened his case. The violin looked shabby and old compared to the expensive instruments around him. But when he lifted it to his shoulder, all the doubt disappeared. This was home. This was right. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and began to play. The first note rang out pure and clear. Thomas felt the familiar weight of the violin against his shoulder, the smooth wood under his chin. His fingers found their positions without thinking, guided by 15 years of secret practice and 20 years of love for this instrument. Ashford's baton moved, and the orchestra joined in. Thomas played the opening phrase of the Tchaikovsky piece, his bow gliding across the strings. He knew this music in his bones. He'd listened to it during rehearsals while mopping floors. He'd practiced it alone in the empty hall. Now, surrounded by professional musicians, it felt different. It felt real. The other violinists stopped playing, one by one, until only Thomas remained. They wanted to hear him alone, to judge whether this janitor could truly deliver what he promised. Thomas kept going, pouring everything into the audition. Every lonely night, every dismissed dream, every moment of being invisible, it all flowed through his fingers. When he finished the passage, silence filled the stage. Thomas opened his eyes and looked at Ashford. The conductor's face was unreadable, frozen somewhere between shock and something else Thomas couldn't identify. The second violinist, an older woman with silver hair, spoke first. "That was exceptional." Another musician nodded. "His tone is beautiful. Clean technique." Ashford seemed to shake himself out of a trance. He looked at his watch, then at Thomas, then back at his watch. "Your sight reading or you've memorized this?" "Memorized, sir." "All 3 pieces on tonight's program." "All 3? Ashford's voice was sharp with disbelief. "You know the entire concert?" "Yes, sir. I've been listening to your rehearsals for months. And I've practiced on my own." The stage manager appeared from the wings. "Maestro, we have 12 minutes until curtain. The audience is seated. We need to decide now." Ashford stared at Thomas for a long moment. The great conductor looked older suddenly, humbled by circumstance and maybe by what he'd just heard. "Can you handle the pressure? There will be hundreds of people watching. Critics who can destroy careers with a single review. Donors who control our funding. One mistake, one crack in your tone, and you'll be responsible for ruining this entire organization's reputation." Thomas met his eyes steadily. "I understand the stakes, sir. I won't let you down. You're still wearing your work uniform. I can change quickly." The stage manager was already moving. "We keep spare tuxedos in the costume room for emergencies. I'll find something that fits." Everything happened in a blur after that. Thomas was rushed to a dressing room where someone threw a tuxedo at him. The pants were slightly too long, the jacket a bit tight in the shoulders, but it would work. Someone else appeared with stage makeup, dabbing powder on his face so the lights wouldn't make him look shiny. 5 minutes to curtain," someone shouted down the hallway. Thomas's hands were shaking as he tied his bow tie. This was really happening. After 15 years of invisible nights and silent dreams, he was about to walk onto a stage in front of hundreds of people. His reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. Still his face, but dressed like someone important, someone who mattered. A soft knock on the door. The second violinist peeked in, the woman who'd complimented his playing. "Hey, you okay?" "Terrified," Thomas admitted. She smiled. "Good, that means you care. Listen, I've been playing professionally for 30 years. I've seen a lot of musicians come and go. What you played out there? That was special. Don't doubt yourself now. What if I mess up? Then you mess up. But I don't think you will. You've got something real." She paused at the door. "And for what it's worth, I think what you did took guts. Not many people would step forward like that." She left, and Thomas was alone with his reflection again. He thought about his parents, probably watching television at home right now, no idea their son was about to play in a major concert. He thought about his younger self, the hopeful student who'd walked away from music to pay medical bills. What would that young man think of this moment? "Places! Everyone on stage!" Thomas grabbed his violin and walked toward the stage. His legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. The backstage area was dark, but he could hear the murmur of the audience beyond the curtain. Hundreds of voices, hundreds of expectations. The orchestra members were taking their seats, adjusting their music stands, tuning their instruments. Thomas walked to the principal chair, very aware that everyone was watching him. Some looked encouraging. Others looked skeptical. A few seemed amused, like they were waiting for him to fail. Ashford appeared at the podium. He looked at Thomas one more time, his expression serious. "Last chance to back out." "I'm ready, sir." The conductor nodded slowly. Then he turned to face the curtain. "Remember," he said quietly, just loud enough for Thomas to hear, "music doesn't care who you are or what you do for a living. It only cares if you can honor it. Don't think about the audience. Don't think about me. Just play." The house lights dimmed. The audience chatter faded to silence. Thomas felt his heartbeat in his throat, in his fingertips, in his chest. The curtain began to rise, revealing row after row of expectant faces. The lights were bright and hot. Thomas could see the front rows clearly. Men in expensive suits, women in evening gowns, all of them waiting. Ashford raised his baton. The orchestra lifted their instruments. Thomas positioned his violin, his bow hovering above the strings. This was it. Everything he'd worked for, dreamed of, sacrificed for, it all came down to the next hour. The baton dropped. The orchestra began. Thomas closed his eyes and let 15 years of secret practice take over. His bow touched the strings, and the first notes emerged, clear and confident. He wasn't a janitor anymore. He wasn't invisible. He was a musician, and he was home. The first piece was a Mozart symphony, light and elegant. Thomas played his part perfectly, blending with the other violins during the ensemble sections, then stepping forward for his solo passages. His fingers flew across the fingerboard, executing runs and trills with the precision of someone who'd practiced them 1,000 times. Because he had. In empty halls, in stolen hours, in moments when everyone else was asleep. He opened his eyes during a rest and glanced at Ashford. The conductor was watching him with an expression Thomas had never seen before: respect. Pure, genuine respect. Ashford gave him a slight nod, then turned back to the orchestra. The Mozart ended to enthusiastic applause. Thomas barely heard it. He was already thinking about the next piece, the Tchaikovsky, the one with the challenging solo that would test his abilities to their limit. His hands were sweating. He wiped them discreetly on his pants. Ashford turned to the audience and announced the next piece. Then he faced the orchestra again, his baton raised. Thomas took a deep breath. This was the moment that would define everything. The Tchaikovsky violin solo was famous, notoriously difficult, the kind of passage that separated good violinists from great ones. The orchestra played the introduction. Thomas counted measures, his whole body tense with anticipation. Then his moment arrived. He lifted his bow and began the solo that would change his life forever. The notes poured from Thomas's violin like water from a fountain, flowing and natural. The Tchaikovsky solo was everything he'd hoped it would be and more. Every hour of secret practice, every lonely night in the empty hall, every sacrifice he'd made, it all came together in this moment. His bow danced across the strings, drawing out phrases that were both technically perfect and deeply emotional. He wasn't thinking anymore. He was just feeling. The music took him somewhere beyond the stage, beyond the lights, beyond the watching eyes. He was 17 again, playing for his conservatory audition, full of hope and possibility. He was 25, holding his father's hand in a hospital room, choosing family over dreams. He was every age he'd ever been, all at once, and the violin was telling his story to everyone who would listen. The audience sat completely still. Not a cough, not a whisper, not even the rustle of a program. They were transfixed. Even the orchestra members who weren't playing watched Thomas with wide eyes. This wasn't just good playing. This was something else entirely. This was truth. Thomas's solo reached its climax, a series of rapid passages that climbed higher and higher up the fingerboard. His fingers moved faster than thought, guided by muscle memory and pure instinct. The final note rang out, hanging in the air like a question waiting for an answer. Then Ashford brought the full orchestra crashing back in, and the moment passed. But something had shifted. Thomas could feel it. The energy in the hall had changed. The audience leaned forward in their seats now, fully invested, fully present. The Tchaikovsky piece ended with a powerful crescendo. The final chord faded into silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the applause started. Not polite concert applause, but something wild and genuine. People rose to their feet, first in the front rows, then spreading backward like a wave. A standing ovation, and they weren't even finished with the program yet. Thomas stood with the orchestra, his violin hanging at his side, hardly believing what was happening. The woman next to him, the second violinist, was grinning from ear to ear. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." Ashford turned to the audience and gestured to Thomas. The applause grew even louder. Thomas bowed, feeling heat rise to his face. He could see people's expressions now: amazement, joy, surprise. They hadn't expected this. Nobody had expected this. But there was still one piece left. The final work on the program was Beethoven, a symphony Thomas had always loved for its combination of power and tenderness. He sat back down, his heart still racing, and prepared for the last movement of the concert. This time he played with even more confidence. The fear was gone, burned away by the heat of success. He knew he could do this. He knew he belonged here. His violin sang out during the ensemble passages, and when it was time for his solos, he played them with a boldness that made Ashford's eyebrows rise in approval. The Beethoven built to its magnificent conclusion, all the instruments joining together in a statement of triumph. When the final chord sounded, Thomas let his bow fall to his side, exhausted and exhilarated. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. The audience exploded. This time the standing ovation was immediate and thunderous. People weren't just clapping, they were cheering, whistling, shouting, "Bravo!" Thomas stood with the orchestra, overwhelmed by the response. He saw critics in the audience scribbling notes furiously. He saw the mayor standing and applauding. He saw wealthy donors with surprised smiles on their faces. Ashford walked over to Thomas and did something unexpected. He extended his hand. Thomas shook it, and the conductor pulled him forward for a bow. Just the two of them, acknowledging each other as equals. The applause somehow got even louder. "I was wrong about you," Ashford said quietly, his words barely audible over the crowd noise. "Completely wrong, and I apologize." Thomas nodded, too emotional to speak. They bowed again, and Ashford gestured for the entire orchestra to stand. The musicians rose as one, and Thomas stood with them, no longer just the janitor, but one of them. A musician, an artist, someone who mattered. The audience wouldn't let them leave. They kept applauding, kept standing, kept celebrating. Finally, after what felt like forever, the curtain came down and the house lights came up. Backstage, Thomas was immediately surrounded by orchestra members all talking at once. "Where did you learn to play like that? How long have you been practicing?" That was absolutely incredible. The stage manager pushed through the crowd, her phone in her hand. "Thomas, right? The press wants to talk to you. There are reporters outside asking questions, and I've already gotten 3 calls from other orchestras wanting to know who you are." Thomas felt dizzy. This was too much, too fast. Just 2 hours ago, he'd been cleaning floors. Now people wanted to interview him. Ashford appeared again, his jacket off, his tie loosened. "Thomas, do you have a moment?" They found a quiet corner away from the celebration. Ashford looked different somehow, smaller, more human. The arrogance was gone from his face. "I owe you more than an apology," the conductor said. "I was cruel last week. I dismissed you without knowing anything about you. I judged you based on your job, not your abilities. That was wrong, and I'm ashamed of it." "It's okay," Thomas started, but Ashford held up his hand. "No, it's not okay. I've been conducting for 30 years, and I thought I knew everything about music and musicians. Tonight you taught me that talent doesn't care about titles or positions. It doesn't matter if someone wears a tuxedo or a janitor's uniform. What matters is what's inside them." Thomas felt tears prickling his eyes. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot. I want to help you. Ashford continued. If you're interested, I have connections. I can make introductions to other orchestras, to music schools, to people who can help you restart your career. You shouldn't be cleaning floors, Thomas. You should be playing. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll let me make this right. Before Thomas could answer, a well-dressed older man approached them. Excuse me, are you the violinist? The one who just performed? Thomas nodded, still not quite believing this was his reality now. My name is Robert Chen. I'm on the board of the Arts Foundation. That was the most moving performance I've seen in 20 years. I'd like to talk to you about a scholarship program we run for musicians who need financial support to continue their training. Would you be interested? Yes, absolutely. More people came over. A music critic from a major newspaper, a representative from a recording company, the director of another orchestra. They all wanted to talk to Thomas, to hear his story, to offer opportunities. His head was spinning. Finally, the crowd thinned out. Thomas changed out of the borrowed tuxedo and back into his regular clothes. His janitor uniform was still in his locker, waiting for him. He looked at it for a long moment. Would he ever wear it again? Did he want to? He walked back through the empty concert hall one last time that night. The seats were vacant now, the stage dark. But he could still feel the energy of what had happened, still hear the echo of applause in his mind. Thomas sat in the audience section and pulled out his phone. He needed to call his parents. They deserved to know that their son, the one who'd sacrificed his dreams to help them, had just gotten those dreams back. His mother answered on the second ring. Thomas, is everything okay? It's late. Mom, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're not going to believe what just happened tonight. As he told her the story, he looked up at the empty stage where, just hours ago, he'd been invisible. Where he'd been just a janitor, someone people looked through instead of at. But tonight had proven something important. That who you are isn't defined by what you do for a living. It's defined by what's in your heart, by the dreams you keep alive even when nobody's watching, by the courage to step forward when the moment comes. Thomas had been invisible for 15 years. But now, finally, he'd been seen, and his life would never be the same again. The next morning, his story was everywhere. Newspapers, television, social media, everyone wanted to know about the janitor who'd saved the symphony. Messages poured in from around the world, from other people who'd hidden their talents, who'd given up their dreams, who'd felt invisible. Thomas's story gave them hope, and Thomas, he accepted every opportunity that came his way. He finished his conservatory training with the scholarship. He played with orchestras across the country. But he never forgot where he came from or the years he'd spent mopping floors and emptying trash. He started a foundation to help other people like him. Talented musicians who couldn't afford to pursue their dreams. He visited schools and talked to students about perseverance and hope. He taught them that it's never too late, that dreams deferred aren't dreams destroyed, and sometimes, late at night, he'd return to that concert hall where it all happened. He'd sit in the empty space and remember the night everything changed, the night he stopped being invisible. The night he proved that talent and dedication don't require a title to be real. He'd smile, pick up his violin, and play. Not for an audience this time, just for himself, and for the music, and for the boy he used to be who never stopped believing.